Welcome back to the 8-Man Breakdowns podcast. This is where we discuss all phases of the game of football, including philosophy, play concepts, questions, and more. Joining me today is Coach Tyler Lampert. Coach Lampert is the defensive coordinator at Central Burden High School in Burden, Kansas. Coach Lampert has coached 8-Man now for 5 years, 3 seasons at Argonia Attica, where he helped lead them to a 22-9 record during that span, which included a district and a regional title in 2020. Last year, Coach Lampert took over as DC at Central Burden and helped lead the Raiders to a 5-3 record before losing a tight one in the first round of the playoffs. Well, Coach, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate you taking the time to bring me on.
So here, let's get started with some background information about yourself. So just tell us a little about yourself and your high school days and how you got into coaching.
Well, I took a road less traveled. But I'm originally from Northwest Florida, Niceville. We're in the Panhandle. So I played traditional 11-man football growing up. Florida atmosphere. The best thing I can even describe it is if you've ever been to Derby. That atmosphere, minus a few state championships. They've got a few more than my alma mater does. But you take that atmosphere and then you compound it with the fact that we got to play football basically all year round. Like it doesn't get any better than that from a high school standpoint. Great high school program. We had enough dudes. I want to say we had 60 guys on my varsity roster my senior year. And so we 2-platooned. I played defensive tackle in a 5-2 monster scheme. So I think since the 8th grade, the 8th grade is the last time I played offense. So even on into college, I played inside linebacker. I kind of got there on a less traditional path. I didn't go straight out of high school. I was kind of floundering, and I knew football had always kind of been a constant. So that's what kind of pulled me back in, and that's what got me playing college football. And I ended up playing here at Southwestern College in Winfield before I kind of went into a GA-ship and coached inside linebackers there as well for a year and kind of really got into strength and conditioning as well. But I kind of fell down that road just simply by the fact that I wasn't ready to step out into the real world. I didn't have any clue what I wanted to be as far as a professional, so I just stayed with what I knew. And that took me down a whole path of coaching experiences and opportunities. I finished up that year at Southwestern, and I went to Spartanburg, South Carolina, to do a strength internship at Division I Wofford College, which, if you know your NFL on a deeper level, former owner of the Carolina Panthers hosts their NFL training camp there. So I got to see a lot of NFL caliber dudes when I first got there. That was Cam Newton's rookie year. Brady Quinn, I think, was still there at quarterback. So you got to see some dudes that played the game at the highest level, so that was a great experience. And then I got to work with a ton of different Division I athletes from our football team, volleyball, both basketball programs, baseball, track and field. So I got a good gambit of experience working with just all the sports, especially all the ones that we see in our high schools at the Kansas level. And then while all that's going on, I'm kind of getting serious with a girl from back home, or back in Kansas, I should say. I've been here long enough, it's home. And so I ended up following my way back into the KCAC, and I ended up as a linebackers coach at Bethel College for a year. And that was kind of a big learning experience, definitely a lot of what not to do, or how things shouldn't be type of situation. And a lot of that was set in place before I ever stepped foot on campus. But I made the most of that experience. I ended up that fall falling into being probably the youngest defensive coordinator at the time there at 24. And did that for a year. They brought in a staff, so we were just basically placeholders. So I know what it feels like to kind of just get wiped off of campus, I guess. And got hooked up with our high school here in Winfield My former college coach, Coach Crandall, called up to the coach at the time, Coach Price, and he gave me a referral and got me on. I spent a couple of years here in Winfield coaching the secondary. I was our offensive JV offensive coordinator. So my first roundabout back into the offensive side of the ball, we ran a lot of power. And then, I coached at the middle school level here too. So I got all kinds of facets there. And then my wife and I, we started having kids. I was finishing up some schooling to get my special education certification. So my time in Winfield was actually spent as a para more than a certified teacher. So there was a gap year or two between coaching where I ended up in Argonia and then was able to just be at the right place at the right time and hopped on at A&A because they co-op with Attica. And we had a great run for about 3 years while I was there, and really got to kind of hone what I wanted to be and really kind of dial in my niche as far as coaching goes. And then last year I ended up in Burden. It was my first year there, so I'm coming into my second, and it has been an experience really bringing their culture to new heights there at Burden.
So, Coach, you've obviously got a wide variety of experiences from all over the country. I'm assuming you have a lot of connections that you've created along the way. So, who would you say were your most influential mentors along the way?
Oh, along the way, I've had a bunch, but a few that jump out. When I first got to Bethel and kind of got put into that position, my defensive coordinator was a guy I could call on a regular basis from a scheme standpoint. I mean, he helped me kind of really showed me how to game plan and helped me prepare to game plan for then Saturdays, and what that process looked like. I already had an understanding as a player and working for him, but when I stepped into that role, he was a big help, because we saw a lot of different stuff. We saw a lot of spread, but at that time, Tabor was still running some sort of veer option. So he was a great help getting me set up for some of those things that I hadn't seen a lot. And then along the way, I felt like my high school coaches were, good mentors. And then as I kind of furthered my career, I still got really started looking into being a head coach. And my time at A&A, Coach Greenwood was a big influence, a great mentor, somebody I could really just pick his brain. He's got a great program over there that he's taken a long time to kind of establish and streamline. And I would just sit down and talk through different scenarios and things that he's experienced or things that are current in our program that we're dealing with. And, well, how are you doing this? Like, why do you do it this way? Here are my thoughts. What do you think about that? Does that fit? And he really kind of let me, explore some of these situations that head coaches fall into without really having to get my feet wet. So that was a great experience for me from a mentor standpoint.
I want to jump back into here because you were talking earlier how you said you pretty much have always coached on the defensive side or even played on the defensive side. Would you say you prefer coaching defense? Is that something you prefer or you enjoy more just because you've been around it so much, or does it not necessarily matter?
That's a good question. Defense is something I know inside and out. I know well. So it's always kind of been where I felt at home. But having that experience was definitely a good thing. It's kind of helped me hone my philosophy. Even when I was at A&A, we were divided, two offensive guys, two defensive guys. But I could slide stuff across the table on paper, if you will, and be like, hey, what do you think about this? And we could have, talk about things from an offensive standpoint. So as I've grown and progressed, the value of understanding both sides of the ball from both perspectives has been important. But I mean, if I have to choose, if I had to go out and pick a job off the job board, I'm probably going to look for a defensive spot first.
You talked about strength position there at Wofford and working with D1 athletes and then seeing NFL caliber guys. Stuff that you learned then, is that kind of stuck with you as far as running a weights program and taking that into your physical education as well?
Oh, yeah. It's been a big part. I've used it everywhere I've gone, or tried to anyways. It definitely took off from a high school standpoint when I got to Argonia. And we saw some dudes get strong, but what was most important about those years is those guys that showed up, were the ones that were still on the field at the end of the year. They're the ones that had the most durability. They're the ones that weren't pulling themselves off the field after a long, hard game. And it's held true. And I'm starting to see them really buy into it at Burden. Like these dudes and the girls too have a great turnout with my girls this summer. Just being strong overall. We're not huge. We're not, the biggest dudes when you get off the bus, but we're strong. We're durable. We're athletic. And I picked up all that from my time there. And, I still have guys that I work with there that I still keep in touch with, and I still do research and, look to further my knowledge in that area. But, it's definitely been kind of the foundation of what my strength and conditioning philosophy is for sure.
I like what you're saying there too. The kids, they basically you get out what you put in. They're more durable, and they're the ones on the field at the end of the year because they've been putting all that extra time in. And here's another question for you, back to your intro, because you talked about at the beginning. You talked about obviously being from Niceville, Florida, and a much bigger high school atmosphere, and then now you're coaching. You've coached at two different 8-man schools. Could you talk about the difference, or like what do you like the most about that difference in style as far as like a small town high school atmosphere compared to what you grew up in high school?
What I like about small town and what, really brought me in, like Vanderveer Field over there in Attica, like it's pretty basic. They got grass, they got two goal posts, and they got light posts. They got lights. They got small bleachers, but it's intimate. It's small. Like you can hear everybody, that's around that field, and it kind of has a classic feel to it. Kind of just, like you're stepping back into a different era of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, the kids out there, they're wearing all the new stuff. They're all following all the trends and all that. But just from an atmosphere standpoint, just kind of walking out there, the essence is vintage, man. It's just old school. And that's what I liked about 8-man. That's what I like about, the atmosphere. Growing up and what we had, I mean, we had a big band. We had a drum line that would come over and they would get into it with the student section, and they would just bang on those quads and those snares, and they would have the student section going bonkers. And like you couldn't go into our north end zone without hearing our band crank up, and you couldn't hear anything. And that was great, man. Like just talking about it still gives me goosebumps. And that was exciting. It was fun. But I like being able to come out here on Friday night. I can smell the grass. I can holler across the sideline at a kid on the opposite end of the field, and I can get his attention. And there's something that within this small atmosphere, there is a level of intimacy that I think gets overlooked in the bigger schools because there's just so much hype and there's so much excitement that goes into Friday night. And some of those smaller pieces that kind of make the essence of what Friday night is, they get lost.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've never even thought of it in that way, but obviously, see from my perspective, I came from a small town. I came from 8-man, and the biggest I got, went to was junior college, and at Highland Community College, it's not much. The town's not much bigger than where I was from. So, but yeah,
Right.
having that intimate vintage feel for sure. And obviously, you're never gonna see a drum line for an 8-man school ever. So, but
probably not. And if it is, probably just a couple kids.
yeah, yeah. So here, let's move into this next question here, though. Correct me if I'm wrong. You told me this, but you've been around several different programs, coaching now for 12 years. You've always been an assistant coach?
Yeah, I've pretty much been an assistant. I've never had anything that's like been a head title. Even, at the lower level, being a coordinator, I never really like wore that as the hat, per se, as other than I'm an assistant coach. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me as I'm the number 2 man on a 3-man coaching roster at the junior high level. Like, so I never really kind of played into coordinator positions or those sort of titles on smaller staffs because I think it's kind of more of the ego speaking. On the bigger ones, obviously, there's that clear separation between positions. But, my last 2 8-man stints here and there, like guy who was our co-head coach in Attica, he and I did the defense together, and he was the one signaling in every play, but how we got to Friday night, how we prepared, I took on the bulk of those responsibilities, and he and I kind of split that job. So really, he got all the glory when everything went well. But I honestly enjoyed the process of preparation and game plan and getting our guys in the right position. It worked out well for us. And where I'm at now in Burton, I'm kind of in a unique position where, yes, I'm on paper, I'm the coordinator. And Coach Savage and I kind of joke about I'm more like an associate head coach because he commutes into town from Burlingame, which is about 2 hours away. So 90% of what needs to happen throughout an off season and in season, I take care of. I mean, in some sense, I'm still just an assistant, but my roles and responsibilities would check a lot of boxes for a lot of titles in bigger places.
Yeah, I put that on there originally because you had that great topic of characteristics, and we'll get into that next. But yeah, there's so many assistant coaches out there that their jobs and roles get overlooked, and there's a lot of guys that I know for a fact when I was an assistant coach elsewhere that were assistant coaches that I worked with that would have been great head coaches, and would have been awesome, and they basically had the similar roles like you're saying now, but they never had that interest to be a head coach. There's a lot of people out there that they don't have interest, and that's fine. I mean, there's great coaches out there like that. Whether you're assistant or head doesn't necessarily make you a better or worse coach by any means. So then let's do that. Let's talk about that. So what do you think are the characteristics or what makes a great assistant coach?
I'd say the first thing that you have to be, if you want to work to be a great assistant, is you got to be humble. And the second is you have to take rejection well. Because you may have an idea that you think is going to light the world on fire, but it may not fit your scheme, may not fit your head coach's philosophy. I hate to say it, but that person may be kind of set in their ways. So your idea is kind of put on the back burner. So you have to be able to do those two things well. You have to know your craft. Most importantly, you have to know your craft, what you do with your kids, your position or positions, how that fits into the scheme that you guys are executing, and how what you do throughout the week makes your guys better for Friday night. How that progresses, how it fits within the scheme, and then one thing that I think that gets overlooked, as a young guy and on a bigger staff, you kind of get those jobs. You get the bottom of the totem pole type jobs. You're the tech guy, or you're kind of the equipment guy. Like, know those off the field roles, know them well. Understand your job, and then expand on why we use the equipment that we use, or what does the process look like for reconditioning helmets. If you fall into an equipment role. Know what that looks like. So then if you are ambitious and you want to make a jump to a head coach, you have some insight and some experience, whether it's good or bad, whether it fits your philosophy or not, to make decisions on those off the field roles and those off the field decisions that you really have to take care of more times than not throughout the off season, because that's where you kind of spend more time preparing for next year and whatnot, as being able to effectively make those types of off-the-field decisions. So you put your guys in good spots. You put your school in a good spot. You put your district in a good spot, financially, and just by making good sound decisions that are going to help your program for the long term. So you have to be able to be a forward thinker the further up the chain you go.
Coach, you said a lot of great things. Being humble and taking rejection, and I would agree with all those, obviously. And then doing the behind-the-scenes stuff. Again, assistant coaches don't get all the credit, obviously, hardly any. But yeah, you have all this behind-the-scenes stuff that you got to do. And again, like you said, the biggest thing I would say is if you want to eventually be a head coach on your own, then you can now learn the ways that you want to run your program. And then again, one other thing you said there, taking rejection. Learn how to take rejection. Because, yeah, if you have ideas, I mean, just because your head coach doesn't agree with what you think is best or what you would like to do, again, doesn't make you a bad assistant coach by any means. It makes you all better. Again, you guys are going to grow with that constructive feedback with each other. And then last I would say, too, though, about that is all coaches are important and are needed, especially at
Yeah.
this 8-man level. But yeah, and I've seen that side where you got to do the tech stuff, and I did that for years. The huddle, upload the film, and break down the film, and because I was a young guy with a bunch of older guys, and they didn't have that tech side in them, But that made me
Yeah.
better because I still do that,
Yeah.
So, but
Yep. We when we were GAs, man, we had to be the ones to upload the film and burn them on the discs when we got back from games, and
hmm
that would take hours. And then we'd have to turn around and come in, and then we'd have to burn copies of discs for guys, and then we had to break down our opposing teams. Now I'm not old enough to where I had to go meet so and so, at the four-way between here and Timbuktu, but
yeah,
you know, I mean, I've heard stories from guys having to do that, and I never had to, but I still had my own set of challenges with film and things like that. But we understood the process and we learned how to do that, and like understanding huddle and how handy it is, it just makes things so much easier.
oh, absolutely. And I think you kind of already talked about this, but that is something you do intend to do in the future, though, is to try to be a head coach here in the near future.
That is the next plan. And that's kind of why I decided to come to Burden. I actually had to get certified in PT because my original certifications in special education.
hmm
But Burden's also closer for home for me. So Argonia is like 50 miles, more or less. So it's like going to a whole other world out there. So when I came here, Coach Savage was going to come around. He made some commitments and wanted to come out on top, if you will. And so that was kind of the expectation that I'd come in, we'd work together. It'd kind of be an apprenticeship, I guess, if you will. And then I would next year be officially the top name on the coaches list, I guess. So it's always been a goal. It's kind of been a long road travel. There's a lot of dudes that have gotten positions before me. I never really let that bother me. I always kind of knew when the time was right, I'd be ready for it. And kind of going back to talking with Coach Greenwood on our many trips to Attica, that's something that we got brought up. When the time was right, I'll be ready. And I think I've done a good job getting there. And I think this definitely last step has been a challenge in some ways, but it's been probably the best step that I hope guys can kind of have the opportunity to take so they can get their feet wet and try out, some of the off the field things, how to make, decisions that are going to affect the program that have nothing to do with what goes on in season. Um, have that opportunity because it's what I think probably separates those guys that are just content being really good assistants and those that want to step into being, that top leadership position as a head.
Like you said, you've got a lot of experiences that have helped you become ready for this. So, I mean, and that's awesome. And I like what you said, how other guys that have gotten the chance before you, but you didn't let that bother you. Because I know personally, for me, I was even an assistant coach with several other assistant guys that were my age or younger, and or even guys that I played with in junior college or even in high school that had became head coaches before me. And I thought, in the back of my mind, I was saying the same thing, like, don't worry about that. Again, you'll get your chance. But it did motivate me a little bit. Like just like
Yeah.
I'm going to study that much more. I'm going to try to learn this much more. That way, I am prepared. So
Yeah.
that's the good thing, I guess, about it is the external motivation from it. But that's awesome. I'm excited for you, Coach. And like you said, you're basically already taking over that role as far as being the guy on site handling all the issues currently.
Yeah.
Let's move on here to the next one though. So, and as we've said before, and I've said it a million times on this channel, but football's a copycat game. Everybody knows that. But just tell us something that separates you guys from other 8-man programs out there.
I don't really think there's a lot that separates our processes from other places that are successful. I think our biggest separation, especially moving forward, is our consistency and our work ethic. That's a big thing that we've really kind of built our culture around is consistency. And then our next big thing that we've really, really emphasized now that the consistency is starting to be where we want it to be is your enthusiasm will dictate your effort. So if we can get those things, I feel like that's where our separation is in our intangibles. We got a big senior class, so we'll be able to lead well this year. I've got a couple underclassmen that do a great job leading. I got one of those guys that I think every good high school football team has a few guys that are like heart guys, um, guys that are the glue. And I got some young guys that are filling those leadership type roles that I know when their time comes, they are only going to continue to be the leaders that, we as coaches want um, to have guys like. So I think there's our separation. And then, these dudes are willing to do whatever it takes to kind of redefine what Central is and who they are at Central. I touched on we have spent the summer traveling to play 5-on-5 because we had a hard time getting guys in our area. So we went to Hartford and we went to Burlingame this summer and played up there. And we kind of took on the motto anytime, anywhere, just by the fact that these guys are willing to go places. They're willing to put in the extra work. I got some dudes that have put a lot of extra time in. A couple of them are coming off some injuries, and they've really made an effort to make the most of this coming season.
I really like what you said. The enthusiasm dictates effort, and we've tried to do that. I've tried to, and I was talking with Coach Ayers a couple weeks ago, but we do the Feed the Cats sprint based training, and I'm always looking for ways to make the work in the weight room fun, or the work in the gym, or football practice. Make it fun. So if you can get that enthusiasm, get them. If they can have fun doing stuff that's not easy to do, then there you go. They're going to give you all that effort because they think they're having fun. So I mean that's awesome. I've never heard it in that term though. Enthusiasm dictates effort. So that's cool.
Yeah, it is. And if you really think about it, like I'm sure you can kind of pick out a couple opportunities or instances maybe for yourself or for your guys where the enthusiasm wasn't there, and neither. I mean, they kind of go hand in hand, especially at this level. And I tell my guys that, but I also tell them like, hey, consistency is going to be better than any motivation that you try to bring into the gym or anything, because motivation is temporary. Your consistency is where you build your habits. It's where you build your foundation. I try to tie it into a bigger picture, for outside of sports and life and all that with those guys. But your consistency is going to be what, yeah, man, today's front squad day. You guys, it's our least favorite day. I don't know why. But it is what it is. And I'm like, it's going to get you through that Thursday where we got a front squat and you're going to be better for it. And you're going to be like, well, I just got to do it. It's hard. We're going to get through it. I'll try to I play with more of an open DJ. I kind of take more requests on some of those days. You kind of feel like, they have some control over it. But some of what they pick, I just like, man, I don't know if that's something I can do in my weight room. It's music trends are different from when we were younger.
I'm going to move on here a little bit to defense, and I know we talked earlier just a little bit ago about how you've kind of been more on the defensive side of things, and obviously you've been a defensive coordinator. So if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit of defense, and just tell us a little bit about your base defense.
Well, the 3-2 guy, I'm a 3-2 monster guy. I'm at heart, and so from that standpoint, our base is, we'll have a 6-man box. Coach Savage is more of a traditional 3-2 read guy, so he wants a 5-man box. So we're 3-2 guys in essence. This year we are going to do something that kind of suits our roster depth more, but I won't go too much into that. It'll be different for sure. It's definitely going to give some guys something to game plan for. And if they've seen it, we went to Southwestern, and so we've kind of showed a little bit of our hand. They know kind of where we're at and what we got going on. But from a 3-2 standpoint, like I said, I'd like to have a 6-man box, and I want a monster backer that he can kind of fill and fly wherever the ball tends to stick up.
He prefers a 3-2 read and like more of a 5-man box, and you like the 6-man. You guys see a lot more run-heavy teams out there, or are you seeing some more pass and spread teams, or like what do you see throughout the season?
Out here, I think that I do see a lot of double tight I teams. Um, so some power football. We see a little bit of option. Oxford likes to kind of run the veer. Argonia's going to run. A&A is going to run a pistol based speed option out of a nasty set with a split tight end. That really requires you to be on your P's and Q's as far as assignment goes. And then what I like about, South Sumner, especially last year, they were basically a counter Trey read team. And they had some dudes that they're gonna run the ball hard at you. They had, a shrine bowler. It's been a long time since they've had a shrine bowler. So that was a tough run against. And so to say we see a lot of spread, no, we see a lot of dudes that want to run the ball, jet sweep, misdirection type offenses, but nothing too traditionally spread like what you guys like to do there at Stafford. We don't see too much of that. When I was at A&A, Pretty Prairie liked to spread the ball out. So I like matching up coverages. I like matching up. I like to pattern read in my defensive coverages. So I get more thrill out of matching patterns. I love filling gaps, but I get more out of how am I going to take away your passing lanes.
That was going to be my next question too. Is obviously you said you see a lot of run first teams, but when covering the past, traditionally in a 3-2, do you prefer more man or more zone?
So I always kind of like, being pattern rating it's kind of a blend. But I identify as a zone guy. I don't care for spot dropping. I think it has its place. But I would prefer to try to drop to where you're going to be and as best we can. And with a 6-man box, I prefer to play cover 2. And so my corners are 2 high guys. And then I use my linebackers to either be my overhang, and then I can maintain a 5-man box. Or, if I have a 2x2 set, I got 2 overhang players underneath. And then, I want those dudes to be physical. Like, there should be no reason ever why a linebacker should be running next to anybody, a number 2 running vertical and never touch him. That should never happen. I think any contact is going to throw the timing of a route off. And the more timing that you can disrupt, the more time your defensive line have the opportunity to get to your quarterback. But the big thing is like your pattern reading. Like I was a 4-2-5 guy. So I took the whole cover blue concept and I taught my corners or safeties kind of like how your safeties work reading 1-2 or certain sets, how to read 2-1 with my outside linebackers. And then we just basically built off the rule. If 2's going out, 1's most likely coming back in, and vice versa. And that's where we built our base coverage. And we just, we at A&A, we do a lot of 7-on-7. We would divide it to where like on our light day, we would just do pass skelly. And then our heavier day, we would focus on inside run. And that kind of was our bread and butter. And, we built that around there, and then we come into situations. But what do we do versus 3-by-1 with a tight end or an open set? Or, how do we handle certain things? Like when we played Maxville in the first round, they ran a ton of mesh. So we talked about, okay, well, this is how we'll attack mesh. We're going to get crossers. So we tell our linebacker on the near side, you let that underneath guy go, and the back side or the opposite side linebacker, if he's still running free, he'll put hands on. You'll have a dude coming behind you, so you just settle for depth and you pick that up. And we were able to. And they had an 8-man all-star receiver tight end kid that year. But just by being able to match our coverages with their concepts, we were to be able to put our guys in the right place long enough for our defensive line to get to their quarterback. And we set a record for sacks that game because we just had dudes that could stay in coverage and we're athletic enough to make a play on the ball when it was in the air.
When I was in high school, we did run a 3-2. I wouldn't say it was a monster because we ran a 3-3 stack, and then if
Right,
we saw a spread team, we'd drop. I was an outside backer, so I just moved a corner. Our linebackers would shift in, and our two safeties rotated into a deep middle safety and a corner on the opposite side, and that's all we did.
right,
And we literally played like banjo or just like switch man every time. If a guy went in, inside defenders got him. If a guy went out, outside defenders got him. If they both go outside, you take your guy. Like we ran all man,
right,
and that's all
right.
we ever did. And so I'm definitely lacking on the defensive side of the ball because I don't know all the deeper knowledge and stuff you're talking about. Obviously, coming from the 11 man and working into the 8-man game. So here, one more quick question here about defense, then before we get into the this year. But obviously, you got a lot of detail into your defense and every responsibility and breakdown and exactly how each position plays. But my question is, how do you go about installing all of this? How do all of your guys know when I'm in there? This is my reads, and this is
Right.
how do you install this defense?
So first thing we do, I mean, we're gonna come out versus double tight, and then we're just gonna assign our gaps. I'm gonna assign my responsibilities to my guys up front. Um, you don't have to have a two gap nose for this, dude. For this to work, which is nice. It helps. I mean, I think that's kind of the concept. Having a two gap nose in a 3-2 is like, the pinnacle of being able to do it well. With this, you don't necessarily have to have that. You have to have a guy that can occupy space there. Um, for us, I feel like what was most important is had two defensive ends that can control the line of scrimmage. If you can keep tight ends off of linebackers, your money. You're able to kind of dictate how things flow, how guys fit. So we kind of talk about gap responsibilities because I kind of give them all a gap responsibility. You say, hey, you're an A gap. So I tell my monster versus double tight I set A gap player. Your nose guard has the other A gap player. And then I tell my linebackers, you guys are B gap guys. My defensive ends are edge guys. They're trying to squeeze that down. And then my safeties are going to run. I tell them they're going to run inside out. They're going to run bananas down the alley. Because if we get it to bounce like we should, the safety should clean everything up. And then we kind of work from there. But if we can do that, then we'll talk about, my next big thing that I find to be most important from a defensive standpoint is clearly understanding how to defend the option. If everybody has their job lined out and detailed and how that progresses, if you can do that, the battle's half won. So we assign option responsibilities, and then one thing I did versus a 4-man line set is we'd actually just shift our nose into that strong A gap because I felt like him being head up allows him to really have to puts him at a disadvantage for double teams. And it gives the offense the advantage to get to the second level. So just shading the nose to the strength, I felt like helped us. It gave him a gap, especially if you don't have a two gap dude. But it frees up your monster a little bit more because now you got a nub guard, a defensive end. He's in a loose 3 or a 5, however you want to call that. And then you got that linebacker sitting there. Say we still have a 6-man box. Your monsters. He has no gap responsibility, so he's free to kind of do his thing and fit. He's a bonus player and fit wherever he needs to fit. So that's kind of how we progress. Once we've got that set, the double tight eye set, and a 4-man line, then we just kind of talk about how we're going to pattern read, what the option is going to look like, and then we just work on how our safeties are going to fit, whether they are in the double tight eye set or out in space. We tell them from that standpoint, if they're out on number 1, he's going to be an outside in player. So he's got to work his outside arm free. He's out there on the left side and then work back in. If you can beat that guy, great. But everything should be flowing that way. So he needs to also keep his outside arm free. And then once we've got all our fits, Then we start to have fun. We look at, okay, what pressures, what stunts, what blitzes can we run? Um, and then we start throwing weird, funky patterns at them from an offensive standpoint. And we just kind of work on our inside run. Uh, so that's kind of how it all works. And then that's like I said earlier, pass coverage is my favorite thing. So I really try to like hit them with some coverages that are real, or some concepts that really just kind of make them have to think and make them fail. So then we can kind of talk about it and see how we can fit. And generally, like, and this is kind of where I've learned how I can get better. Like I was talking about, better utilizing field spacing. My general rule of thumb was, when they had questions, but it was, if it's covered, then we're doing our job. Even if we're wrong, if everybody's covered, we're right.
And we haven't had the numbers to do much for even a scout team to run plays to like beat the coverage of the defense to talk about it,
Right.
like how we fix this. But I like all this because and we talk defending option, but we didn't like responsibilities for option and obviously going over our gap responsibility and reads and stuff. And we always read guard. I'm assuming you guys read guards.
Well, yes. So I don't believe that they're like, depending on what that kid's ability is. I'll tell them guard 2 back.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
so
yeah.
Whether it's if we're in a sidecar shotgun set, I'll tell them guard and then cross key the back. So if it's from a defensive perspective, a left sidecar, that linebacker's going to read his guard in front of him, and then he'll read the quarterback. And then the opposite linebacker will read his guard, and then he'll have the back. Because if we get, any sort of like read or anything like that, nobody's trying to guess where the ball's going, because they'll already have their path based on whether the quarterback decides to give or keep it.
So here, let's talk about last year. What'd you learn most about your team last year in your first year there at Central?
Last year, I think the biggest thing we learned is that these guys want to meet expectations and try to continue to raise the bar. I think when we went into Oxford, when we walked out of Oxford, we were 5-1. So like we were in a really good spot. We had goals that we set. We wanted to win more games than those kids did as sophomores. And we wanted to host a playoff game. And, district championship was in the mix. I felt like we had an outside shot, but it was still a possibility. Our dudes compete, man. I have some of the most ultimate competitors I've had in a very long time. We have a kid that's gotten a lot of media attention preseason, and this dude is the ultimate competitor. And a lot of guys that he plays with, they are trying to match his level. The guy will contest my calls when we play kickball in PE. Like he is that guy. But with that being said, like we're never out. So, we get beat up in Oxford. We lose a couple guys to injury. We make adjustments. We go into Wichita Independent, which is always a dark horse. We never quite know what we're going to get with those guys. And we're on the brink of being 45, and that he had a breakout game offensively, and we still lose, but we play a full game instead of being on the cusp of going home at halftime. The guy just competes. And we go to South Sumner. At that point, they had 45 to everybody. They hadn't played a full game, and our guys competed. And at one point, we had an opportunity to close the gap to less than 10. The fact that we had inexperience in the wrong places out there didn't allow us to close that door. So they blew it wide open. We played a full game against those guys. And those dudes are tough, man. They're well coached. They got a big staff. They do a good job of getting their guys ready. But it just shows that our dudes can compete. And then, we go to Mountain Ridge on a short week. A couple plays. I mean, that game against Mountain Ridge is a couple plays in our way, and it's a 4-point swing, and we win. But we lose a close one. It was a great game. I kind of feel like over the years, just kind of reading about coaching and all that. Um, I'm disappointed how our season ended, and I know our guys are, but that's a playoff game we lost close. They did not fare well the year before against West Elk in the opening round. So we're stepping in the right direction. And so I know our dudes are going to compete. They're not going to quit. They're coachable. They want to be coached hard now. That was a tough thing for us when we got there. They couldn't handle being coached hard because they hadn't been coached hard before. Or really hard enough to really understand, what's at stake, where our expectations are, and what we believe they're capable of. So now we're all on the same page. We're ready. These guys are ready for this year. They put a lot of time in this off season, and they have on paper what it takes to have a marquee season.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a great opportunity to look forward to into this year and kind of jumping ahead a little bit. But let's talk about that. So what do you look forward to most going into this year?
I mean, I think going into this year, I think these guys, have expectations to put their team in the gym. Every gym across the state's got their teams, that have done well in there. They want to be another one of those teams in our gym. As rightfully so. I think we have like 11 seniors, maybe 12, somewhere in there. And so they know that the bar is high. They know that, and I wouldn't have found myself saying this last year, looking forward, but they have the potential to run the table for the regular season. The opportunity's there. There's a lot of things that go into that. I mean, as you know, we got to have guys that stay healthy all year, guys that do the right thing, a little bit of luck. But their expectations are we want to make a run. We want to win our district. We want to get out of the first round of the playoffs. We want to make our mark at school and on a bigger stage. And that's their expectations. And I think a lot of those guys are ready to take that on.
A new season with new players. In this case, you have a lot of returning players, but it's always exciting to see what the next year holds. So here, last question then, Coach. Just tell us what's your biggest piece of advice to any current or upcoming football coaches.
I say, man, be consistent. Whatever that looks like for you, that's important. Consistency is everything. And I think we already know this as coaches, how important it is. But wherever you're at, I heard a guy say this. Actually, I saw it on Twitter, but I know the guy who said it from a long time ago. And just understand where your team's ceiling is and try to meet that. Try to get to that ceiling. And that's going to be different for everybody. Like, we know those guys that are truly capable of saying, we're going to make a run for a title, a state title. And that's great. That may be your ceiling. Some ceilings may be, hey, we want to win the district. We want to win X amount of games. We just want to improve week to week. Whatever that ceiling is, keep your guys moving towards that ceiling and, celebrate all those victories, even when, it doesn't look like it's going to be a season of a lot of ups. Celebrate all those little ones. Know that for your program, it may be maybe another year or two down the road, but keep those guys going in the right direction, and it'll pay off. It'll be exactly what you hoped it'd be. It just may not be when you want it to be.
I like that. Try to reach your ceiling, and then celebrating all successes. I agree, because like you said, your ceiling might not be as high as some others, so you might as well celebrate all the good things that you do along the way. And then everything good takes time. I mean, just like you said, it might not be your year this year. Just stick with it. Well, Coach, thanks a lot for doing this with me. I appreciate you taking the time to jump back on and finding time tonight to do this. So thanks a lot for doing this with me.
Yeah, thank you, man. Like I said when we first did this, like I was just kind of putting that out there for you. So I appreciate you, letting me kind of speak on it. I hope I did the sport some justice and put something out there that dudes want to listen to. And thank you. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said before, I love hearing everybody's story, and I love hearing and learning new things from everybody. And I've wrote down a ton of notes here, a lot of defensive stuff. Thanks a lot for doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the 8-Man Breakdowns podcast. If you ever have a question for me, feel free to comment down below on this video or visit my bio to shoot me an email. If you've learned anything or enjoy any of these videos, please click subscribe and check out some of my other videos right here. And as always, guys, thanks for tuning in.